Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by a very special guest, longtime friend, Dan Barto. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Erik, what's happening? Thanks for having me, and this is going to be fun.
So, Dan, you are at IMG Academy, where you've been for the last decade plus, 12 years or so. You've been a player, a coach, an educator, an executive, a technologist. And I want to ask you about the arc of your career. But first, I just want to say that I want to trace our history a little bit, because I want to say that my experience at IMG Basketball Academy was one of the most influential experiences I've ever had. I have to say, one, I was a player there, and then I was an intern there, both under you. And as an intern, but also as a player, I feel like I never worked harder. I feel like it was the hardest I'd ever worked in my life. From sun up to sundown. I remember taking the golf carts to the gym to get it ready, and I feel like that work ethic really traveled with me, or just gave me the confidence that I could apply that to anything I did. There are a couple other lessons I want to share. One is that I thought I was hot shit. I thought I really understood. I was the next Lawrence Frank or Spoelstra or whatever it was. I thought I really understood the game of basketball. And I remember in a very nice and humble way, you put me in my place a little bit, and just seeing how much you knew the game of basketball, and you even shared with me your files of all the stuff you'd collected over the years, really just sort of gave me a humility of like, wow, I have a lot to learn. And then lastly, I remember I was in an email exchange. You probably don't remember this. I was just sharing with you how my senior season was going, and basketball was my whole life. And I remember one thing you wrote in your advice was sort of, do not rationalize with a question mark. And so in terms of what's possible to achieve. And I feel like I really took those three things: one, the work ethic; two, the humility; but then three, the confidence of don't rationalize. Like, why couldn't I start a VC firm and get some amazing people to join it and to back it, or start new companies, or reach my dreams and whatever it was. So I just wanted to start the podcast by thanking you for that the massive influence that those few summers had on me.
Yeah, this has been, during COVID, it's been so awesome to catch up with all the former players, former interns, former people that have come through the academy. And you try to stay in touch with people during normal times. You get an opportunity like this, and you just learn how much of an impact IMG Academy had, and your own mentorship / coaching / friendship with people go on. So it's humbling to hear those things. But I have some memories of you as well during your playing days and during your intern days. So it's, to me, no surprise that you're in the position that you're in, because one of the speeches we always give to, whether it's campers or our players, and you might remember this well, is at some point, basketball is going to come to an end, even if it's after a 10-year pro career. And our job at the academy, and our mission at the IMG basketball segment of the academy, is to teach you how to organize your day to chase your passion of basketball to the highest level possible. And then when you pivot, we want you to chase your next adventure with that same passion, same daily planning, same meticulous addressing of weaknesses, same questioning of why things are the way that they are, so that it can give you an advantage on the court. And then, spin that, like you obviously have done at a tremendous level in the VC world and in the mentoring world with some of your new projects. But my second story is, in my whole history here, I've never seen anybody write notes faster. You would finish a drill, and if you thought the drill was good, you would run over during the water break to write notes in your notebook. And I couldn't believe you. I'm like, get back here, Erik. I'll tell you afterwards what's going on. You don't leave in the middle of the workout to write things down that you want to remember. And in the classroom segment, you being there. And then even same way as an intern, when you were working and rebounding and filling water bottles and wiping up sweat on the floor and waking up rebounding 6 hours on a Saturday, you still were taking notes when you were off the clock. You were watching the other coaches work players out. You were kind of analyzing and breaking down the players to share your thoughts with us, which we use sometimes. And really, same way, like we said, like hopefully someday, when you leave here, you'll be an agent, and or you'll be a pro player, or you'll be, you'll be a nutritionist or a sports scientist, or hell, maybe one day you'll even own a team.
Yeah.
And you're lucky because that dream's still alive for you.
Yeah, the NBA player one is over, but who knows? Maybe the owner one. But no, I appreciate that. IMG is one of the most meaningful and fun and formative experiences of my life. So it's a real pleasure to jam with you on it. And with that as a segue, let's get into it a bit. I heard you on another podcast say that one question they asked you was, what would your autobiography be called? And you said one step ahead. And so if you sort of trace your multi-decade career in basketball and in the various different forms, where do you think you've been one step ahead, or how do you sort of articulate the threads that you've kept on pulling in your career? Because you turned down a bunch of NBA jobs, you could have had a bunch of different positions, but you went about it your way.
I was blessed. My dad was a teacher, my mom was a nurse. I say that all the time because I can't thank them enough. My dad was also a basketball coach, so that allowed me early access to high-level basketball, and they were really good when I was in my, youth years of 9 years old. He took a break from basketball for a couple years and then got back into it and was lucky enough to have one of the top high school teams in the country. This also was 93, 94, 95, coincided with kind of the rise of AAU basketball, which we all know so well. 97 was also a little bit of a change in the NBA collective bargaining agreement. You moved into 2001, where not between 97 and 2001, the idea of the straight from high school to the NBA started to happen. I got to trace some of my dad's players on his team and the local AAU guys on their journey towards becoming first-round picks, so that gave me unique access. My college career was being a student manager. We were laughing about wiping floors and filling up water. That's what I did for 4 years. And for those basketball people that don't know the legend of Charlie Coles, I went to Miami University of Ohio. Coach Coles is renowned in the college basketball world. His family of coaches included guys like Sean Miller, who's now at Arizona, Thad Matta, who most recently was at Ohio State, Rob Senderoff at Kent State, James Whitford, who's now at Ball State. So I had guys that were next-level guys mentoring me before I even knew they were next-level guys. Coach Coles coached with a lot of personality, as did my father, although my father definitely threw more chairs in practice than Coach Coles did in college. But again, the learning would never stopped. And then lastly, when I finished college, I moved back home to help with the family businesses. On top of being a coach and a nurse and all these things, my family actually owned two bar restaurants that were local places. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So if you know the history of Pittsburgh, local means, steel mill, shift work, all those things is kind of how my dad and grandpa built the bars. But another very unique experience being able to bartend and be around what goes on with people between the hours of 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. During my college years on top of basketball. So from a life experience, I like to throw those things in there because when I finished, my last stint was with Shadyside Academy, a very high-end private school. Also got the luxury of being around the Pitt program. At the time was Ben Howland and Jamie Dixon, two other guys that just flew to the top of the college world. And my last kind of thing that happened that I want to share was as a 23-year-old hotshot assistant coach, I was given the opportunity to interview to be a head coach at the age of 23 at a local high school, Springdale High School. And I didn't get the job. And I was devastated that they didn't hire me because I knew so many people and I should have got it. And I knew everything there was about basketball. And that day was when I actually went home and started thinking about the next steps. And within the next week, I found IMG Academy. And I applied for an internship, unpaid, got it. And literally my never left really. So that's how I got to IMG Academy, and my career arc since then has kind of been everything from coaching eighth grade girls to working for, early on in his career with guys like Jimmy Butler, being on the court with Kevin Garnett and Kevin Durant and, high level people. Today, Ty Lue got named the LA Clippers coach. I got to spend tons of time with Ty Lue towards the beginning, the beginning parts of his move into, the tail end of what he's doing now, and just unbelievable access once I got to the academy.
Yeah. I personally never saw you throw a chair, but I could see the energy, the intensity. I could see it happening. So I appreciate you having it in your family. Let's talk about segue into how the game, and maybe we can talk about the pro game, how the pro game has evolved over the past couple of decades. Like if you were to talk about maybe the biggest turning points in how the game is played differently, or the biggest, or the different phase waves or biggest changes that led to the game being played differently. We'll get to the business later, but just on a game level and what that means. What comes to mind for you?
Well, I can't not address the business, because the reality is what has changed the game is the rule changes. I believe since 2001, I think it's been 17 rule changes. And a lot of these rule changes are to make the game more fan-friendly and more kind of scoring perimeter-oriented. As we've seen the adjustments the last 10 years, those are things that have definitely made the game more open and allowed for things to be more exciting, I guess. And then you're always going to have innovative people. You're always going to have, we were discussing the zone defense and it being bigger in these playoffs than ever before. You have Denver with what they did, playing big lineups. Okay, you have teams that are building their franchise around young players to stay under the cap, so they have to be super innovative with the amount of threes that they shoot or how many paint touches that they get, because they know they don't have the weaponry to compete with the top teams. And in 2000 and I believe 15, when they changed the salary cap and the salary cap went up by 30 million, that shook the way the teams had to develop their rosters. And I think that if you look at this year's playoffs, bubble or not, this year's playoffs, everybody was trying to build their team to beat the Lakers, even though we had never seen this Lakers team before.
What ads might you try to make, or how would you approach that?
I think that obviously you need to have a true rim protector to kind of keep them at bay. I think that you'll see teams in the West load up with rim protectors, maybe even try to experiment with playing 2 rim protectors and basically 3 kind of hybrid guards. I think that if Houston keeps Russell Westbrook, they could kind of develop a roster around him, not because of his offensive ability, but just because you can pretty much put 2 rim protectors around the basket and have them set 500 ball screens and spread the floor with shooters. Miami had it. Miami had the formula, just not the amount of athleticism. And just, again, if they put people away in the early series, maybe they have some more energy late against the Lakers. But you have to hand it to the Lakers organization and the players on the roster. I mean, we talk Rondo hitting threes, KCP hitting threes. Yeah, Danny Green, doing what he does and just finding ways to win, even though it doesn't show up in the columns. And that's, that starts with the general manager. Pelinka did a great job, or Rich Paul, whatever you want to joke about.
Yeah. It's interesting. LeBron has a specific way of building teams, right? Like he gets these veterans who are a bit, past their primes, but, know how to win and are shooters, but they're not exactly Kyle Korver shooters. And they're not exactly like, I don't know, Bradley Beal, like, other sort of all-star, except when he had Kyrie. But it's an interesting way that LeBron has of building his teams. Like what's your perception of how he thinks about?
I think that obviously taking the players that will take, Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee and Rajon Rondo, guys that are willing to take a pay cut, are few and far between. But I think what LeBron does that people discount too much is he leads by example, but he also knows how to have a lot of fun. You obviously Jordan and Kobe, they tended to rub people the wrong way that were on their own team to get the most out of them. He's found a way to build camaraderie to get the most out of his teams at the right time. And then if he feels, obviously, if somebody's eroding that camaraderie or is not buying in, then he does have the power to have them moved or make them so miserable that they want to be moved themselves.
Yeah.
But again, I think that probably because of his upbringing and being exposed to adults at such an early age, I think he's a genius reader of people.
Yeah. There was this sort of viewpoint at one point that centers who couldn't step out, who were only limited to the post, but who couldn't step out and shoot, were less valuable or didn't have as much of a place in the NBA. Maybe one example that comes to mind is Roy Hibbert. Like, did the game sort of pass Hibbert by, or maybe even, you're talking about Dwight Howard, in some ways he underachieved relative to what his potential was, some people think, or maybe Andrew Bynum. Of course, these people had their own challenges, but is there something to this, or how do you sort of make sense of sort of the role of the center and how that's evolved over time?
I mean, the rule changes changed a lot because when they can guard with, the post differently. And you also have, just the pace of play, the amount of times that you have to change ends of the floor and the way that people manipulated their offense to put people in more switch situations. Teams started valuing being able to guard point guards because of their efficiency and productivity. And that led to throwing the ball into the post less, and then when it did go into the post or hit on a slip or hit on a roll, the athleticism is just so high that the rotations were faster. And so it just, the rule changes and players being at a higher athletic level than they've ever been. You look at the international component that a lot of times people who come from international countries, they may not be the prettiest thing to watch all the time, but their basketball instincts are much higher than Americans on things like rotations and what they're supposed to do to take the team out of what they're doing offensively. They're tremendous at it. I think you can see that. Obviously, Luka's the prime example from this year. But again, if you look at the shot charts, when the center was strong, you saw a majority of the shots coming from the block, the short corner dunker position, the mid post, and the elbow. And now, because of teams trying to beat the teams with super centers, the majority of the shots come from the NBA 3-point line.
Yeah.
And they either come deep in the paint when the help isn't there, or it's all outside of the 3-point line. And now it's starting to shift back. With these 5-out teams like Houston and like Miami, it's starting to shift back. We saw a ton of mid-range in the final series, and we saw a ton of mid-range in the playoffs. And as teams go to more 5-out, trying to keep everybody happy and everybody getting their statistics, like Milwaukee, I think you're going to start to see those shot zones and maybe even post-ups truly coming back for centers. And the last point I'd like to make is when the one-and-done rule ended and guys had to go to college, people that were identified as superior basketball players at age 14 chose colleges. From age 14 to 18, they got bigger, they kind of got better, but they never had to play with a sense of urgency that 82 games requires. Then they go to college as a 7-footer or a 6'9" stud, and the college game is completely different than the NBA game. And as they go from the NBA college game into the NBA, the psychological component combined with the easiness that things came to them from probably 2012 to 2020, I believe hurt the center from being able to get in and bring it every day and bring it for the right reasons and be coachable. I think it's the position that's early identified the most that also probably has the biggest fail rate.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And where do you see that going, by the way? They've made a bunch of changes over the years, one and done, et cetera. How do you expect that to evolve over the years in terms of what the rules are or what you expect young, talented people to do? Do they go to college? Do they go international? Do they go straight to the league? And what do you expect to happen? And what, if you could wave a wand, what should happen?
What should happen is, what's going to happen is basketball is probably going to go most likely to club 12 months out of the year. COVID has kind of started that. I think that Mark Cuban presented the idea like 10 years ago that NBA teams start to act like MLS teams and start to act like European club teams and build out their own feeder systems, which then recruit from an area or a geographic region. Whereas even if someone moves into that geographic region, they can play for that club team. We've seen for the last 6 or 7 years the building of super high schools. We obviously are one of them. We have one of probably the best team in the country. We won a national championship 2 years ago, got canceled out of the national championship this year. But everything evolves. You know, we've been doing it really well for 5 or 6 years. But as I've seen the market change, this is where it's going. I mean, kids are going to go online to school. Kids are going to go and potentially just do 4 periods a day to maintain their high school eligibility. And city academies, you know, the San Francisco Basketball Academy or the Golden State Warriors, you know, U18 program and U16 program is where it's going to go. Now, the NCAA will still exist, but it will exist more in a hockey baseball style where players who go would need to commit to at least 2 full years, 3 years removed from high school, and then they would be draft eligible. If they would like to go to the pros before that, they would have to be somewhere other than the NBA.
Yeah. And what about the game more broadly? You were mentioning, you know, shot zones coming back. Maybe, you know, in the next 5 years, do you expect any major rule changes or any other sort of changes to the game that, you know, are we going to be scoring as many points? Like, what do you expect to take place in the next few years?
You mean from strictly on court?
Yeah, on court or rules related, or if the business of basketball affects the on court.
I do think that obviously kids will be able to enter the draft out of high school again as part of the new collective bargaining agreement, whatever that may end up being, or the change that they had already proposed for, I believe it was 2022. But as far as the on-court rule changes, you know, I think from the NBA standpoint, for sure, I think they're going to allow at some point some level of hand checking or hands on the guards, just to make the game more physical. I feel with the rise of, you know, the popularity of hockey is skyrocketing among youth players, the popularity of UFC. I mean, there's some level of combat that people enjoy. I think that we saw it during, you know, if you're flipping between playoff games and you see something on Twitter that there was some type of altercation. And again, look, I don't want the NBA to go full WWE. That's not my point. But I think that the physicality versus letting guys just dance around with the ball will force more downhill play and force, you know, again, more hard contests. That I don't want to sit here and say that teams are definitely going to go bigger, but if I was a GM, I would be trying to draft the most athletic 6'9" guys and above and try to work on their skills, much like Milwaukee did with Giannis. I think that is where you're going to see a lot of people go and just say, hey, we're going to develop this guy for 7 years between our D-League team and pro. And that's just how we're going to – because we can't beat Anthony Davis and LeBron or KD and Kyrie or Jimmy and Joel Embiid next year for the Heat if we don't have multiple people that can keep them away from the rim.
Is that your prediction that Joel Embiid is going to the Heat?
Yeah, I think it's going to be like the reunited guys that didn't get along before, like just the ultimate troll/heel turn.
Is that a Bam trade, or is Bam still there?
No. I think that Bam stays. I just think that, you know, I think that Philadelphia has to make some moves, and I think Joel Embiid is great where he's at, and obviously dominant, and maybe not be the greatest fit along those guys, but I think that if Jimmy Butler and the crew say we want to win an NBA championship and Joel Embiid can't figure out how to get into that top, you know, 8 players in the NBA from a respect level, then everybody's got to give up a little bit of something for the greater good.
It was fascinating watching Butler in the finals. He was sort of just his mid-range game. I mean, it wasn't anything from 3. It was just, I don't know if it's Jordan-esque, but I mean, it was just really it was tremendous 101 basketball mid-range. I mean, it felt sort of retro. I mean, his game is, I can't think of other players that have been sort of more improved, that had sort of had a questionable path in certain teams or certain ways, but just proved themselves, you know, a winner in one season or one playoffs. Have you seen something like it? Or?
No, and look, Jimmy's unique. I mentioned earlier that I got to spend some time with him when he came out of Marquette, and he did all this pre-draft training and spent time down here during the summer. And super, super unique. I remember him getting into my car when I picked him up from the Sarasota airport, and I had true, and people who are fans know this, like the guy literally turned up the country music song and sang every word as we drove up 41 back to the academy. And I'm like, how do you know all the words to this song? He's like, I'm from Tomball, Texas, and I love country music, and I brought my cowboy boots. And I mean, the guy was just so genuine. But, and I'll bring up 2 points about Jimmy that I think that people will find interesting. One was, again, like he had that level 10 psycho obsession after he had a bad day. Like his bad days were, by himself at a basket for an additional hour by himself, not wanting to talk to anybody. His lost one-on-one games were him disrupting the next day to play that guy again in one-on-one, like just ruining everybody's training. Not ruining it, but like literally eager to get back on the court to play one-on-one against that guy again and prove to him. And you can't teach that. From an on-court standpoint, he has short arms. It's a short wingspan. He actually has low hips if you look at him towards, the overall. So his ability to decelerate in that mid-range and his ability to quickly change direction is different than most of the athletic builds in the NBA. And that's why you can see him get to spots and do things that people don't think that he should be able to do. He also was blessed to play with Buzz Williams, and Buzz Williams was a huge paint touch guy. Drive the ball as hard as you can every day until you get it into the paint and then make a decision. Most colleges don't do that. So he acquired these skills that you're seeing with a unique body and then a unique upbringing and then a unique mentality. And I think we saw that all kind of come together, which was very fun to watch, and, a guy that you can't stop rooting for.
Totally. I mean, another player that had a tremendous season was Gordon Dragic. And it's I feel like he's one of the, you were talking about the hand check rule. I feel like he's one of the people who really benefit from that. Maybe Steve Nash, another person a long time ago, comes to mind, that people, it like transforms their careers, the ability to just get into the paint easier, et cetera. And maybe these aren't the most athletic. I mean, Nash is really athletic, but they're not sort of, Russell Westbrook or something, but they, with the ability to not be checked, they can just get into the paint easier. I feel like,
yeah, we call it moving on C's and S's. If you looked at basketball movement like the alphabet, a C is a very difficult kind of pattern to keep a full speed movement on if you're running in the direction of a C, or if you're running in a circle, or if you're making an S. And Dragic is one of Steve Nash, obviously, as well. Chris Paul is amazing in that they move on what we call C's and S's at full speed. And they also, because they have this unique understanding of their body and movement patterns, they can also leverage the defender's body. At some point, the defense has to change the angle of their hips and lose balance. Like you can't move backwards and laterally without losing power. It's impossible. And those guys play so much that they get so good at feeling that moment when someone's going to get off balance and shooting or changing direction or letting the defender get off balance and going back the other direction. And again, it's a very unique skill that 5-star fast twitch super athletes can't do because they don't have the deceleration, and where they have a messed up lever system with super high hips and super long arms, that they can't quickly do the things that some of these short-armed, low-hipped, special low-moving guys at the guard positions can do.
I want to talk about how coaching has evolved over time. My sort of guess is that players just have more leverage, and so coaches have to be more reserved, perhaps. I'm curious if that's right. But I also, you mentioned earlier that college game is just different from the NBA game, and we see some college coaches come in and have success, like Brad Stevens. Others perhaps struggle, like my own, John Beilein. And some of them are situation specific. Some of them are, hey, just the game is different. Any commentary on either of those? How coaching has evolved over time, or just some more than the differences between college, being successful in college, being successful in basketball, and NBA as a coach?
Well, college is this. College, you are the CEO, the CFO, the COO. You are the lead strategist. You are everything to everybody. And a lot of times you're making 4, 5, 6 times the amount of money that even the athletic director is. And basketball boosters are donating at a rate that's higher than any other department on campus. So those guys can stick to their systems, stick to their beliefs, do things the way that they want to do it. Now, Beeline was a very special example because he was also an innovator and created a whole new offense and a whole new kind of philosophy. And so did Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens was an analytics guy. So when you look at those two guys and the success that they had at the college level, it was a combination of the two. Even if I was just on the phone with a former Florida State guy, and I don't think that me and Leonard Hamilton will high five each other the next time that we see each other, but Leonard Hamilton has kind of done the same thing at Florida State, where he's kind of been the CEO of everything, and over the last 5 years has put together power lineups at Florida State, which could maybe, win some SEC football games with the type of guys that they have. Now, flip to the NBA. A lot of times you have a GM who, when he's making a coaching change, is actually trying to keep his own contract extended or keep his own contract negotiations moving forward. So he's chosen, and the owners have chosen to side with the general manager or the lead basketball person in the front office. Or they've chosen the coach, and they're going to bring in a new GM. So I'm sure with the word, and I have one of the parents of one of our kids that I know does some search stuff for Korn Ferry. His name's Jed Hughes, and every time I've had conversations with him, he's used the word alignment. You have to align the organization to make sure that everybody's ideals maximized. And the coach, a lot of times, is the fall guy. Look at the Clippers. Look at the Houston Rockets. Now, Daryl Morey just resigned today from Houston as the general manager, which means they're changing everything in Houston. Look at Golden State. Obviously, they've had great synergy with Bob Myers and Coach Kerr, but that starts with the ownership. So depending on the organization, the coach is doomed from day one.
Yeah. And maybe that's why Lawrence Frank evolved to executive from a coach. What did John Beeline innovate on? Or what was so innovative about his offense or his philosophy? Or
John Beeline coached at each level. I believe he started at junior college and then at Division II. And then, when he got to the Division I level, he knew that he wasn't going to woo 5-star athletes and five-star players to West Virginia. And, he had developed this system to kind of spread the floor out. We messed with it I messed with it as a coach some too. It's basically known as the 2-guard offense. And it's very skill oriented, and it's basically meant to take away the help side defense. And then it has a bunch of tactical calls to take advantage of the point guard, the shooting guard, the small forward, the power forward, and the center position. And then as a coach, you can just sit back there and make the play calls. And he did this with guys that were not 5-star recruits or not 4-star recruits, and he was able to win games. He countered his offense with a hybrid change of the 1-3-1 defense. 1-3-1 zone was the least played zone defense at college basketball at the time. So he not only took the 1-3-1, he took it and he changed the calls and the rotations and made his own. This then sent it into a point where you were very difficult to prepare for, and you were very difficult to do any type of scouting on because you didn't have enough time between Tuesday and Saturday or Wednesday and Saturday to prepare for him. And then now as he got further along at Michigan, he was able to bring in 5-star recruits or, high-level players that also had the IQ, and that's why you saw the tremendous success that he had, because the players bought into the system, and then now they could physically always compete with what was going on with the other team.
Yeah. Speaking of sort of revolutionary offenses at the time, the triangle offense has the NBA sort of passed the triangle offense by. Phil Jackson, of course, really struggled with the Knicks. I mean, who doesn't struggle with the Knicks as a longtime Knicks fan? So I don't want to blame him. But what's your take on that?
I think if the Los Angeles Lakers right now wanted to implement the triangle offense, they could, and they could have a lot of success. And we would say that Frank Vogel has reinvented the game. But the reality is he just has LeBron and Anthony Davis and a bunch of shooters. And that's what Phil Jackson always had. He always had two studs and a bunch of shooters and tough guys on the defensive end. The problem with the triangle offense is, again, it really messes up your defensive transitions. It also needs players that can make mid-range shots, and there's just not a ton of them that make the mid-range shot. So as the game went to teams, Mike D'Antoni changing the game with the Suns, he was the innovator. 5 years later, everybody's shooting more threes because he's throwing all these crazy analytics into the world of why 7 seconds or less works in Phoenix. Well, he had Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, which helped.
Yeah. And John Murray. Yeah.
But people started copying that. And then, again, it was really hard for teams that would run the triangle or run typical pro sets if the other team's getting 3 points for every 2 points, or they're shooting X amount of threes that equals 90 points and you're shooting X amount of twos that only gets you to 75. The math just didn't work to stay in that offense any longer.
Yeah, the shot clock management is fascinating. In the Heat in the last few games, I saw them just getting down to just moving too slow into their offense, and then at the end they just had to throw something up. But yeah, just getting something early is so important, it seems.
And again, I think that when you have to work hard to keep people off the glass, and you have to work so hard to keep a body on LeBron or on Anthony Davis to keep them off the glass. It wears you down to where you want to rest on offense. Yeah. And that's how teams are going to have to build moving forward. They're going to have to build more physically ready, less skilled teams and teach them how to be skilled.
Yeah, and maybe deeper benches. It would have been great if we saw 10 plus or something in that game.
Which will be fascinating to watch with this offseason as the salary cap goes down.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about NBA team strategy and how that's evolved over the years. Of course, the ways to level up have been, the NBA draft, free agency and trades. How has it sort of changed, and how do you see it changing going forward, just in terms of NBA team strategy, getting a team like the Pistons, or if you're a team like the Knicks, obviously, or I don't the Wizards or something. How do teams who aren't at the top get into the top? How has that evolved, and what strategies do you think make most sense?
I think the biggest change that you're going to see coming up is personality analytics. I think that you're going to see a lot like the big firms do. You're going to see where people's motivations lie and if their motivations are going to change. And then you're going to do your due diligence to see if they've been, if they've stayed true to their word in the past. And when you draft kids out of high school, you'll have a little bit more control, and they will be a little less tarnished by the policies and procedures that kind of go on amongst the high school ranks and in the AAU world, as we unfortunately saw where that kind of market went in a bad way. Now, when you look at having the right personalities, which I think the Heat were the perfect example of that, as well as the Lakers bench this year. Everybody from, Alex Caruso's accepting his role to Jared Dudley, who probably could have contributed, but just such a great locker room guy and such a great person to have around practice every day. I think that's going to be, if you have the cap room, you can build your team that same way. You just have to woo a small market superstar to your city. And then I think you're going to see other ones that, build their team around the guys that they drafted, and they basically do what Danny Ainge has done in Boston, and you're going to have to make some hard decisions and let some guys walk. But you're always going to be one piece away from a championship as opposed to a total rebuild. I think you're going to see, as the values of the franchises go down here in kind of the recession time, I think you're going to see teams, spend less, and you're going to see teams really try to be one piece away, or hope the other team has one player that gets injured, or you got the European guy that came and no one thought he was going to be as good as he was. And you're going to see a lot of teams at the trade deadline is going to become a much bigger part of what affects the playoffs.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So you don't expect teams to just sort of like go, tank or go for championship. You expect teams to sort of incrementally try to improve, and it's worth it to get to this 8 seed or 7 seed as opposed to trying to get that first pick or something.
Right. I think if you look at the Lakers, the new collective bargaining agreement happened in 2015. Salary cap went up 30 million. They knew that they need to get a superstar. They spent 4 years building towards that and got the guy that they wanted. But also, again, if they wouldn't have got him, they would have got somebody else with that plan and probably been damn close, just like the Clippers, do. And yes, I think that once the new collective bargaining, if they have to redo a new collective bargaining agreement right now, then people will start planning around the flexibility that gives you. But the finance is always going to go into what you're doing. Because the Lakers had to spend a year probably figuring out how they were going to make the Anthony Davis trade work. And then they had no control over whether New Orleans was actually going to agree to it, or he could have just as easily been in Boston or Chicago.
Yeah.
So you spend all this time trying to build the perfect plan, and there's just so many details that go into the getting somebody to accept what you want. And again, New Orleans is only 2 pieces away from being really damn good again. So that's a win for them.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And it's amazing how much it really depends on the owner. I keep talking about Knicks fan, but are the Knicks not going to be good for another decade? I mean, is ownership just matters so much? Or how do you see the Knicks playing out? Give me some hope or or the opposite.
I mean, I think that obviously they have a structural change in their front office. Yeah. They have a guy in their front office, William Wesley, who can help them navigate the free agent markets and make sure that the motivations are going to be right. They have some good assets that people will take in trades if they wanted to get 1 or 2 players. I mean, this week it was, hey, they're going to make a move to get Chris Paul, and he could eventually be the head coach of that organization, which is just crazy that people are thinking that far down the line. But I think you're 2 years away from knowing. You're going to have a year to use your current assets to bring in good players, and then you're going to have that one summer of free agency where you get your Kawhi or you get your LeBron, which now will be Giannis, or it will be another Jimmy Butler again, or it will be Devin Booker. Is probably the most likely candidate to try to go to New York to be a superstar other than potentially Giannis. But, with these teams building this way, it actually stunts the development of high-end rookies and high-end second-year players. So it's going to be hard for us or hard for the teams to really know who can blossom into that all-star caliber. Like Devin Booker did it because Phoenix has not been very good.
Yeah.
He was able to acquire the skills on a bad team. Maybe Zion can do the same thing if New Orleans stays where they are. Ben Simmons is a perfect example. He was going to be the next coming, but then Philadelphia tried to get really good really quick. His generational talent that he was going to be the next LeBron was not what Philadelphia wanted at the time. They just wanted to try to win a championship. And you're going to see more of that. Unless there's a big change to the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, let's segue into the business here, because it's interesting. It's been documented how much we talk about AAU. It's been documented how much Nike and other companies have influenced basketball through AAU and others. And there's just a lot of ways in which basketball players are becoming more savvy businessmen and business people and are making more money, in fact, outside of the game in certain ways. LeBron and others. Do you expect that to continue? How do you expect sort of the business of being basketball player to evolve? Because then I want to transition into what that means for the league.
Obviously, I mean, all we hear about all day and night here is that the name, image, and likeness that's coming into college, and I think this is fascinating. What I'm about to say is our campers that came through camp this summer cared more about what high school players were doing than what NBA players were doing. The kids that came through camp that are 12, 13 years old cared more about LaMelo Ball and Cole Anthony, because that's who they see on their social media, than they did about Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James.
Wow.
85% of them, if you asked them who their favorite team was, would have either said Golden State or LA. And, so it's very top heavy. I mean, I would almost say that Clipper or the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors might get broken up because it's almost to an oligarchic state where there's nobody else that people even like remotely like care about. But you know, you look at the players and they want more control. The agents have less control than ever before. Family are more educated. Family are protecting kids' brands all the way down to 13 years old in the basketball industry. And they are starting to build their brands earlier. Now there's people that are tracking what a 15-year-old's, you know, social media worth is to the community, what Bronny's social media value is, how that's going to affect his name, image, and likeness. And kids are going to spend more time on that than they are actually following the NBA and following what the players at the NBA level are doing. Now, from a business standpoint, I think players are going to be able to deglobalize and actually worry less about having a global brand. And most players are going to be able to find more money to make in their community. And they're going to become much more community-oriented, invest in commuter districts and commuter zones that exist in the cities that they're in, and maybe even look to stay regionally. I'm not saying next year. I'm saying, 4 to 10 years out, try to stay more regionally so that their brand is super strong in a small area. Or like Cole Anthony wanting to be, a Knick, because that's where he grew up and just doing everything he can if he got there to do all the right things so he could stay. Right now, you don't want a kid to go back home. You don't want a kid to be in his hometown. You don't want him to have all that distraction because you want him to develop. But I think from a value standpoint, I think you're going to see more kids stay home closer to college and for college, and more kids want to stay home for their pro career. And then if you do end up somewhere else, if you want to build your brand, it's going to be in the community first, not traveling to do a clinic in Shanghai or, in Tel Aviv or in Barcelona, but it's going to be like, no, let's make sure that everybody in Orlando, every business wants me, every school wants me to come. And that's going to be where the incremental value just skyrockets.
I feel like the Ball family has been really, and one may not disagree with all of their decisions, but has just been really innovative in taking a few, LaMelo playing overseas, their experiment with the shoes, their investment in their own personal brands on social media, really seeing themselves as owners and creators and wanting more upside. What do you think their sort of legacy is in terms of what other people follow from what they've done? Or,
I mean, you have to respect the innovation and the creativity and almost, from LeVar's standpoint, the narcissistic belief in everything that he does. The poor guy was just 2 years ahead of everything.
Yeah.
If he would have waited 2 more years on all of his projects, they probably all would have taken off.
Yeah.
With the last son here with LaMelo, he's obviously, the stars have aligned. He's going to be a top 5 pick. He's going to bring, eyeballs to whatever organization selects him. And I think that he's a very good player too, because of the experiences that he went through. But I think that 5 years from now, when they're looking back, I don't think it would have been possible to build $1 billion industry outside of the shoes. I wish he would have stuck with it, because, I think that, as we see with Puma entering the market and doing so well, there was a need in the market. They just didn't capitalize on the momentum that they created.
Yeah. I want to segue into the topic I've been most excited to talk about, and we've sort of been jamming on a little bit over the past years, is really just this concept of, could the NBA players start their own league? Should the NBA players start their own league? And I'll set this up by saying that, about a year ago or so, I was just thinking that, why don't NBA players own sort of equity in the teams? These teams are worth, billions of dollars. They, you come to see LeBron more so than you perhaps come to see, the specific team or the NBA. And, are players capturing the value that's sufficient to what they're creating? Should they not have, more ownership? And if LeBron plus others decided to go elsewhere, could they make more money? So it was mostly a business decision. But then most recently, players have been more active in social justice. We all know this. They even protested a game. And there's a question next season of whether the NBA will sort of go along with it in the same way. I think Adam Silver said, hey, next year we might not have some of the signage or some of the verbiage. And so that might sort of raise the stakes in terms of maybe NBA players saying, no, we should do it this way, and maybe wanting to split. I know you thought about this a lot. How do you make sense of this, and how do you react?
Let's work. You want to work forward or backward?
Whatever. Let's work backwards.
Okay. So we sit in a market where there's a couple, not only NBA players, but a couple very influential people that are sitting on an unknown opportunity, because the players are scheduled to take by the letter of the contract and the collective bargaining agreement, a 30 to 40% pay cut for next season, including the max players. Now, this will all have to be negotiated with the NBA, and they've started negotiating it since last April. In my opinion, the players probably should have not played this summer in hopes of getting the future of the collective bargaining agreement really ironed out, because it was really their only chance. They would have had to leave a lot of money on the table, but in turn, they're going to leave a lot of money on the table as it is. And in this situation with the, whatever you want to call it, the basketball-related income decreasing so much and no tickets sold and blah, 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 the actual max players at the top of the league are scheduled to take a cut, because max player means that your income is based upon a certain amount of basketball-related income. So when your top players are going to take a hit, they're going to be the leading voice to the younger players. In the last collective bargaining agreement, all of my insiders told me that the top players and the top agents, basically they present to the players union, and those players that don't know that much and aren't that well versed just want to get paid and play. So they don't look at the details. And then 3 years later, they're like, oh my goodness, why is this my only option? So we were going into a market where players were going to probably be paid less than their statistical value anyways. Now we enter a market where tomorrow we could wake up and the NBA owners could cancel the collective bargaining agreement because of force majeure in the level of income that has been decreased. But when you factor that, this social justice, and you have players, and I'm using LeBron and Kyrie because this is how things always start. There's obviously a divide there, and Kyrie spoke up heavily and didn't participate. LeBron kind of led the charge and really put, I don't want to say the whole league on his back, but did a very good job of keeping things moving forward. But there's a lot of money. I believe it's over $3.5 billion of the basketball related income in the 1920 season going to the NBA and going to the owners, and $3.5 billion going to the players. And just like any other business, you now have a situation where the players may want a bigger chunk of that pie. Being in a large venue that holds 20,000 fans is probably not as important of a concept as getting the proper global streaming deal. I think that you have 27% of the NBA is now international players who don't bring that many fans to the arenas or to the games, but obviously have a large following in the global market. And, yet you have an opportunity for ownership that could exist if you can get, 100 to 120 players on the same page and be willing to backfill that with either less franchises, let's say a 10 to 15 team league, or if you want to go to a 20 team experimental short season, bubble league, you could look at bringing in the D League players who are out of a job right now, who are going to make nothing. You don't think that every team of G League players would be totally on board to join forces with, let's say, LeBron's league or Kyrie's league if they each started their own league? And these guys are going to get paid nothing this year. So if you come up with something where some type of streaming deal or some type of, have the league in Disney or Las Vegas and do it for, 3 months and just let people travel in to watch you play from all over the world. There's some precedent set with the NBA Summer League. There's some precedent set with the bubble that the interest would still be there. Yeah, ratings are down, but there's still hundreds of millions of people that tuned into NBA games that would follow what goes on. So
Love
that's
that.
that's today. Now I can tell you my thoughts on why I think this is the time to make it happen after I
Please.
see what you say.
Oh, well, I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I would love to hear your, say more. Why do you think now is the time to make it happen? Do you think it will?
I
Yeah.
think if you look at, I'm going to use two examples here that are crazy, but I was very lucky. I was lucky to be in a big part of a documentary and kind of wrote the script for a documentary called One in a Billion, which was about Satnam Singh, the first Indian player that was ever drafted into the NBA by the Dallas Mavericks. He was at the academy for a little over 5 years, and did really well. But that whole project started with a partnership with Mukesh Ambani, probably the richest man or richest family in India, where they wanted to grow sports globally. This gave me access to go to India on two different occasions, spend some time in New Delhi, spend some time in Navi, Mumbai, which is about 2 hours north of Mumbai. And IMG, the global company that I kind of worked for at the time that has stuff with the academy, was a big investor in the IPL. The IPL is the Indian Professional Cricket League, which was started by a guy named Lalit Modi. I believe I pronounced that right. Interesting to look him up. Interesting to follow all of it. He basically took all of the best cricket players in the world and started a 2-month super league in India and sold sponsorships to the franchises and got the TV deal done with the assistance of IMG at the time. And so I got to be around India when all this was going on. And it was super controversial, and it was a big deal because cricket is huge, obviously, in Europe and in England and New Zealand and Australia, and then India, it's gigantic, Pakistan. And they pulled it off. And they not only pulled it off, is they made, with this auction-based league where basically people bought franchises and then they auctioned off the players to the franchises. The richest people in India bought the franchises as basically a fun thing. Now 50 million is a lot of dollars, but for a lot of people in India who could do it, they did it. Then the auction league came, and the auction league basically was paid for by the sponsorships and the TV deal, which would now be a streaming deal. And they were able to pull this off, and you couldn't get a ticket, and everybody who was everyone in Bollywood was sitting courtside for these quick matches. What was interesting was they did a shortened game to make it more exciting for the fans, and they did it right on Fridays and Saturdays, where the whole town and the whole city, much like we do with NFL and college football, this is what everybody did. And I think that example shows that somebody, and this Modi, was leading the charge. This was his vision for 10 years to do this. And he finally, the stars aligned with the TV contract being up and him finding a sponsor to put some money behind it and somebody to fund it. And everything fell together. And other than the other national cricket leagues wanting to murder him for stealing their players and disrupting their organizations, it was a huge success. And it still is a huge success today. And if you ever meet cricket people across the world, that's all they'll talk about. Is that league, because that's all of the best players competing in a very intense 2-month segment. And more recently, which I love, and hopefully at least one other, I'm hoping that there's one other listener that might listen to this, is, Cody Rhodes broke away from the WWE and started his own wrestling organization called the AEW. He partnered with a guy named Tony Khan, who is the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars' son, and a big part of that. And they took the idea to Turner Broadcast and got a TV deal, and then began recruiting some of the best wrestlers in the world to switch over from the WWE and from New Japan Wrestling and some of the independent circuits, which I'm equating to the D-League, to join. And they're not, obviously, they just had their 1-year anniversary last night of being on television every Wednesday, but they have, just impeded the whole market, and people all over the world basically value them as the number 2, which could easily with where the WWE is shaking and Vince McMahon getting older,
they could easily be an equal competitor within 4 years. So by year 5, they could actually be, right there. But it was the alignment of Cody Rhodes wanting to do this and coming from a famous family of Dusty Rhodes and having tons of history and support on the wrestling side, and then Tony Khan wanting to do something completely crazy. And then again, Turner Broadcasting wanting to get back into the game because they had been such an influential part of WCW back in the 90s rating wars of, Raw versus Nitro for your wrestling fans out there. Yeah. So I'm using those 2 sports examples to kind of lead into the fact that it has more with the market being ripe and the equation being there and people in kind of the finance world needing things to do with their money. I don't know that world as well as you do, but it wouldn't just be a toy. There would be large returns, just like AEW and just like the IPL. These people would see large returns on their investments.
Totally. I have a bunch of reactions. I mean, one is I feel like the NBA, if under a real threat of someone like LeBron, going to start a new league, I feel like they would cave. Maybe you disagree, but if now the split is 50-50, I wonder if they would go as low as like 20-80 or something to just keep the players involved. So I think players have a lot more leverage than perhaps they even think. If they actually, if having a credible threat, and maybe it's not even Kyrie, maybe it has to be LeBron, because the NBA could lose Kyrie. But I don't know, losing LeBron would be tough. I think the way to get people involved. So one, you need a player like LeBron. There's only a few people like LeBron, right? Or maybe it's like LiAngelo Ball. It's like the next generation or something. You need a guy like the wrestling guy you mentioned, an executive or the Jacksonville Sun person you mentioned, a leader, a business leader. But then I also think you need to sell the dream of, hey, this is going to be the next NBA, and dozens of players and influencers are going to have equity or buying in on the ground floor, and really incentivizing people on a level of this is this is how you make the most money over the next 30 years, 50 years, way beyond your playing career, is really give them ownership in it. Spencer Dinwiddie on the Nets is doing some fascinating stuff on blockchain. He's really interested in ownership. And the last thing I'll say is, it's interesting. I have no idea if there's any evidence as to whether the drop in TV ratings is because of some of the sort of activism that's happening, or whether it's just because of how social media now works. People are tweeting but don't watch it on television. But it is interesting. It's very common in media companies and in other. We're sort of seeing this great fragmentation where instead of serving everybody, you serve a smaller audience. Maybe it's a politically aligned audience, or maybe it's something else, and you just serve them way better, such that you get much more revenue per user. And so I could see a split in leagues where instead of appealing to everybody, they appeal to certain niches, but you take a lot more. People pay as fans just more because they're more super fans. So those are my reactions.
The thing I'm going to throw out there, if there was a startup league, is I think some of the agents have pulls too. Like I think if LeBron James decided he didn't want to do it, but Rich Paul decided he did, or another agent that represents, some of these guys represent 30, 40 players. Like you could see a pool of agents get together and say, hey, I think I can get 70% of my guys to do this. Or if you get 2 of the strongest European agents together with 2 American agents and 1 Chinese agent, and you know that you're going to get 3 markets to kind of be able to sell to the streaming companies, that you could get a pretty large deal on the books from a TV standpoint or from a sponsorship standpoint. So some of the other names that I wrote down, like obviously LeBron and Kyrie, I wrote down Rich Paul just because he has influence. I wrote down William Wesley, who's the Knicks, obviously, front office, just because of his connections and innovation and just everything that he kind of has to put together. And then the last 2 here are kind of crazy, but you're not going to disagree with me. I mean, Mark Cuban could I don't think that he's anti-NBA, but he's definitely pro-change. Like the guy has innovated everything, and he's 7 steps ahead. And he also understands streaming and understands Rays and understands how to do something. And then the last one here coming in crazy on top of LeBron is
Dan Gilbert?
Globally is Yao Ming.
Wow.
Imagine if LeBron and Yao Ming partnered on this and wanted to get people behind it. Imagine how many people would be lined up. I mean, you said former athletes, like Kevin Garnett would buy a franchise tomorrow. He can't necessarily get an NBA franchise, but he could. The last thing I'll kind of say here is I do think that what is really unique right now, and I had this discussion with someone yesterday, is in America, we've seen the unfortunate incidences of some of these cities kind of getting torn apart. So you're also going to see the ability to build small arenas skyrocket in cities, whether it be, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, or Orlando, so whether it's a smaller market or whether it's a bigger market, for someone to throw up a 10,000 seat arena that's only specific to the Manhattan Mules or whatever we want to call them would not be as difficult as it was 10 months ago. And I think that when you look at multi-use facilities and then getting to the MLS stage where you could actually have, standalone stadiums within the first 5 or 6 years of your league or in the first 2 years of your league, then you're really looking at being a serious competitor.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I think about how you mentioned Garnett. I mean, there's so many people who want to be owners in certain capacities. My understanding is, I think I heard from someone that it's $25 million minimum to buy a piece of a team or something crazy like that. In technology for startups, much less than NBA teams, but a lot of people want to be a part of Uber or want to be part of whatever. We're trying to make it easier to have more people on the cap table such that you can give more people ownership and get people in for smaller checks. And so instead of, tens or 100 people on the cap table, you can have thousands. I think similarly for NBA teams or for this new league, if you were able to allow people to buy in at a much smaller, price level such that you could have, a majority ownership, but then this long tail of influential people who then will promote it and stuff. It's players, it's former players, it's celebrities, etc. I think it could be really powerful. I mean, one broader question, like, does Nike have a role here? Are there other, you mentioned agents, are there other companies or types of institutions that also could have some leverage here or could make certain things happen?
Nothing currently jumped out to me, but obviously I think we're going to see some merger and acquisition of some of these apparel companies. I think we're going to see you could see some Chinese companies merge at a bigger level. I mean, obviously Nike is not the example, but I do think that as there's less available, that one of them would be very interesting in putting in a much bigger stake than they're currently putting in as a sponsor. Yeah. Especially when we discussed earlier where, let's say this league does get off the ground and then you have youth leagues within it, just like, FC Barcelona does, or just like, Manchester United does, where you have all these youth teams all the way down to 8 years old. Then there's huge value to be involved from a apparel / shoe / a lot of these sports apparel companies have become technology companies as well. So, when you're looking 3-5 years out, then they should invest. It's just, will they?
Yeah. It's the reason I mentioned Nike, I'm not super familiar in AAU. Do they have a disproportionate ownership or influence over AAU? Or if a company does, who sort of owns that pipeline?
For years, they were just the innovator. They have the most money invested. They're always they just seem to be ahead of the game. They've had the same leadership up until the scandal. So they had a lot of stability. They had a lot of innovation, and they had a lot of loyalty. So a lot of the best players just stayed there. A lot of the best players wanted to be there. Adidas and Under Armour did a great job of really penetrating the market and doing it. And they got some of the best players in their leagues, but they never were able to kind of overcome the median talent that Nike had in their youth leagues overall.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think in order to start this league, if someone like LeBron, anything's possible. If you don't, I feel like you need to convince someone like Alonzo Ball or LiAngelo Ball of like, hey, you're an innovator. You want to leave a legacy. You're willing to take a risk, and really go after these. You need a pipeline of talent, and then you need a tremendous storytelling organization and marketing organization. And it's a documentary of you're tracing this new league. This is year one of what's going to be a multi-100-year organization. And maybe the league starts out pretty young, or you get some people from the D League, but it's everyone investing.
The play also right now is, let's say the salary cap goes down by projected $30 million. The mid-level players are going to make less money than ever before. And the young players are going to have a much higher chance of ever. I mean, the amount of players that make more than $10 million a year is going to be the lowest that it ever was. So if you could create a proposition where the median player is going to get a contract and an equity share or a guaranteed, basketball related income from their franchise, to pay them more or pay them the same for less work, then you could have something to propose to the median player or the older player, because we've seen some success with the big three, not only from a television contract, but a super high competitive people going to the games. I think that you could definitely create, hey, I'd rather play 45 games and make $4 million than play 82 games and make 5.5. Right. Plus, I'm going to get some shares if we do well, so I'm going to be better vested as opposed to getting traded halfway through the year because my contract is tradable. Yeah.
Totally. And also, I don't know if Stephon Marbury wanted to go to China and play there when he was done with his, when no NBA team would take him in the way that he wanted. Or there's a bunch of players who have to end up going overseas and it disrupts their whole lives. Maybe some want to, but for others who want to keep playing, but still full court basketball, still at a very high level. Marbury was still fun to watch. He still could play. He had a great career in China, right? So that could have been.
And I think, look, the China League pays the second most. The Euro League up until COVID was booming. The Australian League and Korean and Japanese leagues are becoming very, very appealing for the later stage players that are over 30 years old to go and finish out their career. But I think it also plays into what we're talking about. I don't know how welcomed Americans will be 3 years from now in some of these countries. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how much Americans are going to want to leave their families behind and go to Europe or China 3 years from now. Hopefully it's all the same and everybody's making the money that they were making. But if it goes the opposite direction, then the need for a second league becomes even higher or even bigger, because now you're talking about another 300 to 500 players who are very good, not wanting to leave the United States, but still being able to put a really good product on the floor.
Yeah, no, this is a perfect place to wrap. It's going to happen. We're going to make it happen. If you're listening and you want to be a part of it in some way, want to see it happen, reach out to Dan and myself. Dan, any other plugs that you want to leave us with, or last notes for people who want to learn more about you or find you online?
First and foremost, if people aren't familiar with IMG Academy and what we offer for camps and our boarding school product, if you're looking for youth athletes to be pushed to the next level, there's nothing like it in the world. It will change their lives, whether it's for 1 week, 1 year, or 6 years. I can't recommend it enough to all the parents out there. We do not have a jumping program developed for you yet, Erik. But I will continue to look into that with our strength staff. And then again, I think that for all the people that are looking to that are looking for technologies to push on youth athletes, especially in the basketball segment, that's my passion. That's what I spend every day. Besides this business stuff, toying around with is sports technology and how we can help this next generation of basketball players outperform the one we currently have, because we've been damn lucky right now.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll have to do another episode to go even deeper. Dan, this was a ton of fun. Thank you so much for calling the podcast. It was an honor.
Awesome.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.